Half American, half British, half Australian again, half German, part American, half Australian, half German. There comes a point where we need to question, what is this obsession with mixed race Filipinos? Let's talk. Filipino society is obsessed with whiteness. From a popular culture dominated by mixed race Filipinos to the tens of thousands of women per year moving abroad to marry white foreign partners, it's clear that there's an issue in the Philippines. Today, I'm doing a video essay on something I believe to be just a blatant problem. I'm going to interrogate the Filipino media. The preference for having mixed-race Filipinos in public-facing roles is harmful to the way that Filipino audiences see themselves today. Based on the representation in the media, or the lack thereof, Filipino audiences feel that only certain people are worthy of being seen, and it's those closer to whiteness. Or, if not white, at least in possession of Eurocentric facial features. And in this video, it's my opinion that the preference for mestizos and Eurocentricity in the Filipino media is a form of neocolonialism. The preference for whiteness in conjunction with the averseness for native appearances are just the same iterations of white superiority popular during the colonial period. So on the one hand, we have a preference for whiteness, and on the other, a reluctance to showcase native appearances. Could you be any less subtle? Just say that you don't like the way that full Filipinos look and move on. I believe that this kind of mindset has instilled a kind of inferiority complex in many Filipinos, and this leads them to think romantically about white people at the cost of failing to recognize the value in themselves. Now, the first example I want to provide of this is how the inferiority complex has manifested into people's romantic preferences. So I'm going to be discussing the case study of the mail order bride in the Philippines. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what the term mail order bride is, it was a term that was popular in the 1980s to the 1990s to the early 2000s, and it signals a couple, conventionally a white Western man and a woman from the East, whether this is Eastern Europe or the Far East, who have met on what we call a mail order bride website or a mail order bride catalogue. And what this process is, women will list themselves on websites or inside catalogues to be approached by Western men. And these men can peruse these websites and catalogues and look for their ideal woman. Men could then purchase the details of their desired woman, spending anywhere between $4,000 to $10,000 and initiate contact with them. And so understandably so, the mail order bride now has very negative connotations. And some of the most popular groups targeted by Western men historically have been Russian women, Ukrainian women, Thai women, and Filipino women. And the reason why I'm mentioning this in this video is because women from the Philippines have disproportionately dominated the mail order bride market. This is to say that Filipino women, more than women from any other country in the world, made up 70% of women on these mail order bride websites and catalogues. Furthermore, in the 1990s, an average of 17,000 Filipinos went abroad per year as spouses or fiancés to foreigners. Now, to me, these statistics are quite staggering. The main question I want to ask here is, why were Filipino women specifically looking for white Western men, and why were there so many of them? When 70% of all women on these websites are from the Philippines, you have to ask, is there a level of enthusiasm there? Now, without a doubt, you can make the case that economic stability, self-betterment, there being more opportunities in the West, these are what these women were truly after, i.e. they didn't really care about the husband, using him as a stepping stone into a better world, a green card, a way out of an unstable living situation. And I completely agree with this argument. I think that it's definitely the most compelling, given the fact that millions of women in the Philippines today still live in very precarious financial situations and strained familial arrangements. I do think that there might be something else fueling their motivation, however. And I think that this is especially the case considering this is the Philippines we're talking about. And the reason why the Philippines is so unique and so complex to the point where a purely economic lens isn't all revealing is ultimately because of its historical background. And what I mean by this is, when you look to the Philippines, recognizing its past as an ex-colony of the US and its subsequent exposure to ideas of white superiority, as well as the way in which these ideas manifest today in the form of glorified mixed-race celebrities, you can also make the case that perhaps it's a genuine desire and aspiration to be with these white Western men that also fuels their motivations. This links on quite well to what I said at the start of the video about the issue of representation. Filipino audiences are not used to seeing themselves represented even in their own country. whether this is modelling or acting or even on massive billboards. Roles explicitly linked to beauty have always been reserved for those who are mixed race, or at the very least, those who fit into Eurocentric beauty standards. So they learn that what is desirable and what is worthy of being swooned over are those who fit a more white-presenting standard. And this love for whiteness, in conjunction with the skepticism over native Filipino beauty, is exemplified by the mail-order bride. Rosie met Ben on a mail-order bride website in 1999. There was a 25-year age gap between them, and Ben was an American man living in the US at the time. In an interview with Rosie, and upon her being questioned as to why she specifically chose to pursue an American man, she answered that Filipino men were shallow, immature, and non-committal compared to American men who she claimed were sincere and caring. And that although Filipino men didn't come close to American men in terms of values, they could at the very least be as attractive as Western men. Oh, but there was a catch. It's not just any Filipino man, but specifically those with, and I quote, Spanish blood and Western features who could compete. And I believe that the Filipino media and popular culture has programmed many Filipinos to think like this. Everything in the media that is explicitly linked to ideas of beauty, i.e. models or actors, are never shown through people who look like the vast majority of the Filipino population. So Filipino audiences learn that their faces, their features, do not deserve to be seen. In choosing to represent celebrities who do not resemble the Filipino population at large, not only conditions the idea of whiteness as beauty, but of full Filipinohood as inadequate and inherently unbeautiful. Now, where did these ideas of white beauty come from? First, let's dive into a brief history of the colonization of the Philippines by the Americans. So the Philippines was a US colony between 1898 to 1946. In order to legitimize their colonization of the Philippines, Americans emphasized their roles as the bringers of education and modernity. And this obviously relied on the characterization of the Filipino as the very opposite, uncivilized, unenlightened, and backwards. And indeed, this was the generic view that many Americans held. However, to them, not all Filipinos were bad. Mestizos in the Philippines have always been seen as the better half of Filipinos. The American colonial administrator at the time, Fred W. Atkinson, believed the Filipino race to be intellectually deficient, but that Spanish mestizos redeemed the race. In his travel diaries, he wrote that the Filipinos who were of a higher caliber were those of the Spanish mestizo class, and they had the capacity to redeem the Filipino race from, and I quote, barbarism and heathenism. There was a clear difference between native Filipinos and mestizos, whom were seen as closer to whiteness and Western civilization. This sounds very familiar. So historically, and even today, mestizos were being championed over the native. However, much worse is that today, it's Filipino society itself championing them, showing just how far internalized racism runs in the Philippines. Now, you'd think that with the formal departure of the US in 1946, that these ideas would have just faded away, but they haven't, signaling that there's some kind of upkeep of these ideas internally within the Philippines today. And in this part, I'm going to examine how Filipino society itself, including the media and popular culture, how these things are responsible for perpetuating these harmful ideas. Here I'm going to talk about one particular case study. One of the powerhouse beauty companies of the 1950s to the 1960s, so the period immediately after the removal of the US, was Kamay, known for its soap products. And the original Kamay girl who was selected for the very first poster advert was the Spanish-Filipina actress Francisca Paquita Roses. That is a white woman. We can see how white-presenting appearances were explicitly associated with beauty. Another advert that Kamay made was a television advert released in 1967 called Ang Barko and President Roosevelt. And this video advert promotes the soap in an American charged environment. This is clear already from the title of the advert, which literally translates to "The Ship, the President Roosevelt." And this raises red flags instantly, because what relevance does an American boat have with a soap targeted at Filipino consumers? I'm going to roll a few of the clips now, and then I'll give my analysis shortly after.
Ang barko, ang President Roosevelt, ang dilag, kahali-halina. Saan man siya magpunta kay daming napapalingon, humahanga, kamay, malinis at malakremang kutis. Kahali-halina, makatawag pansin, kaya't kay daming napapalingon. Ang malinis
The first thing I can see here is this woman keeps on being stared at by American men. As the voiceover narration of the video is explaining the beautifying capacities of the soap, this woman is simultaneously being stared at by these American men. The soap is so good that it gets American men to look at you. So basically, the effectiveness of the soap is confirmed by the attention that the user attracts from these American men. And if this wasn't enough to tell you just how great Kamai's soap is, the Filipino woman is even invited to an all-American dinner on the boat. She's even seated at a dinner table with a lovely American couple. Oh, and if it wasn't clear just how great our soap is, by the way, as she sits down, the American men at the table behind her just have to look at her and stare. So if it wasn't clear, all of these American motifs highlight the Filipinas' ability to integrate into the all-American fare. Her beauty is measured and indeed confirmed by her entrance to the boat, her warm welcome from the American couple at dinner, and the attention she receives from American men. And also worth noting that despite the obvious undertones of exotic female performativity, this Filipino woman is not uncomfortable by the attention she's receiving from all these men, rather seeing it as a sign of validation of her beauty and her belonging. Now, when I first watched this video, I genuinely found it laughable. Promotional content like this ultimately reveals a lot about the marketers themselves and what they believed would make their product sell. And in this case, Kamai's soap allows the user to integrate into American culture and secure the affections of American men. That was it. That was their strategy. So it's clear now from this entire case study of Kamai, its tagline being the soap of the world's most beautiful women, represented only a narrow group of women, those who were mixed race or incredibly white presenting. And this has an impact on wider audiences as well. Filipino audiences have literally learned to base themselves on the extent to which they successfully meet Western standards, whether this is physically by having the Western look or by being culturally American. To be white or to be American is clearly the preference over anything remotely native. So I want to talk now a little bit about Miss Universe. From TV shows to modelling, the overrepresentation of Eurocentric Filipinos is apparent. When Catriona Gray won the crown in 2018, I couldn't help but think about how it was an Australian Filipino who had won the crown. Bearing in mind that at this point I was already questioning the dominance of mestizos in public-facing roles, it got me thinking as to whether this was even more telling of a preference for those who more readily fit into a Western ideal. This anxiety is further compounded by the fact that historically, many other Miss Philippines representatives have also been of mixed ancestry. Just to name a few, we've got Josephine Estrada Brown, Lelaine Bennett, Gloria Diaz, and Margie Moran. And in my view, this suggests something about the public-facing nature of whiteness. It has a legitimizing effect. It's a way to legitimize the Filipino nation on the international stage. To say, oh, we're just like you. And I think that this belief alone suggests just how much they believe their own country and their own people to be inferior or incapable of measuring up. So overall, just to round off the video, I think that the dominance of mestizos in contemporary Filipino media lends itself to a deep-set societal inferiority complex. Filipino audiences would prefer to see mestizos on television to act and to model because they just can't imagine themselves up there. And this is unsurprising because historically the only people worthy of being seen were those who were white or those who were closer to whiteness. And this brings me on to my final closing comment. Why is it that in an era of post-colonialism, the Philippines is still going by the standards introduced by its own colonizers? This isn't the 1900s anymore. The Philippines is an independent country. It needs to act like it. And what's better to do this than to promote the beauty of its own people? The Filipino people who have, in their own country, always been treated as an afterthought. Anyway, this rounds off my video for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm really intrigued to hear what you all have to say. So let me know down in the comments if you agree with what I said or if you have some other opinions that maybe I didn't touch on. I think that in order to make a real change, it's really important that lots of people become exposed to videos like this that actually question what's going on. So if you have enjoyed this video and if you have agreed with any part of what I've said, please give it a like and a comment just to let me know. And if you enjoyed this style of video where I sort of talk about philosophical issues like representation and race and all that jazz, then make sure to subscribe to my channel because there'll be a lot more videos like this in the future. Anyway, so for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video and I'll see you in the next one.